Good morning, 8th grade remote learners. I'm not sure why my head is so large in the corner here. There we go, we fixed it. Sorry about that, but it is Wednesday, August 19th. It's Wednesday morning, it's first hour. Today, obviously, we're doing section 3 notes. My mask is off, but you can see the line in my beard. It looks stupid, but I can't help that. So hopefully everything's going good for you. Most of you have done a good job of replying to my question. So far, just one. I'll have another one today, of course, to count as attendance. Hopefully you are copying these down into a notebook. When you get notes, they've got to go in a notebook. I will collect those at the end of the 9 weeks. You'll have to bring those to school on one of the material collection day, Tuesday or Thursday, or you can make arrangements with me, but that's not going to be till October. So until then, questions I send home when we read the chapter or whatever else, you just send to me by sharing your Google Doc, emailing it to my messages. Copy and paste the answers into Remind, take a picture with your phone and email it to me at nbats@cpher99.org. However, you have shown me that you're doing the work is fine. I just need to know that A, you're doing it, B, you're getting it, and C, that you're doing the questions correctly, using complete sentences and all that stuff that we do normally when you are here in person. So I will try to keep this video to, 15 minutes or so. Cannot promise, because as you became aware last year, I talk a lot, but it is what it is. And then I will also attach the, sorry, I had to pause for a second, and I forgot to take out the breakfast trash and put the breakfast back outside. But here we're back. And so I will attach the notes in the Google Classroom and on Remind, because I know that, like I said, I go too fast in this 10 to 20 minute video, hopefully around 15, for you to keep up and write the notes as I am talking, but you do need to copy all of them down. And so that's the trade-off. You get only a 15-minute portion of being forced to listen to my terrible dad jokes, but in return, you've got to write all the notes down, whereas people in class, who knows how far we'll get. We've been doing a good job of getting most of them in, but hopefully soon I'm going to get a Bluetooth microphone, and hopefully we could do some of this live. I can record class while we're actually having class, and you could either watch it live or later on YouTube. I'll upload it to YouTube again, but that is in the planning stages right now, because I am pretty much have no spare time to try to get anything done, because this has been, for you and for the students here and for the teachers and for the administration, for everybody, a crazy year so far. But hopefully soon we'll be able to bring you actually into the classroom during class, instead of just my floating head in the corner and my mask matted down, beard, talking to you. So attendance question for the day. I'm not always going to do that at the end. Sometimes I'm just going to throw them randomly in the beginning or in the middle, so that way you can't just fast forward to the end and be like, oh, I got the question. So do you have siblings? I have one brother, Mr. Bats. That's, if you have a brother, you have to answer that. No, none at all, or whatever. Just tell me if you have siblings. Yes, I have siblings. No, I don't. It's fine. Again, it's not. The question is just to make sure you're paying attention to the video, not necessarily because I don't work for the census, even though this is 2020 and we're trying to get that. I'm not making a record of your family. I just want to know that you've been paying attention. And that's just a random question that I thought of off the top of my head right then. So when we left off, we were talking about basically what's causing the split further between the North and the South. And the short version of the answer, of course, is slavery. People want to argue of what and why the Civil War happened, but the bottom line is slavery, and it's really not more complicated than that. There were a lot of side issues that branched off from the bark of the slavery problem tree, states' rights issues and nullification crises and stuff like that. But the reality is it all comes back to one thing, and that is that the Southern states wanted to be able to keep people of color as slaves. Northern states did not want them to be able to do that. And now what a lot of people want to hear in that is that Southerners are racist and Northerners are not. And it's a lot more complicated than that. There is a lot of racism that exists in the South at that time. Of course, they're literally keeping people of color as slaves. And so obviously that's incredibly racist to begin with. But the idea that we in the North, in Illinois and in New York and in Ohio, we get to be on the good guy side for once. You should be proud to be from Illinois, and the fact that we were on the right side of history in the Civil War and we stayed in the Union and didn't join the Confederacy. But to have the idea that we didn't have problems with race and race relations of our own is not necessarily accurate either. And we'll talk more about that as time goes on. But this wasn't some paradise for people of color either. In living in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s was a tough time if you were anything but a white man in America. Women didn't get rights until 1919, which we'll talk about that a lot later. And so when we left off, we were talking about John Brown, who was a person who thought it fell upon him specifically to end slavery. And he knew, and people thought he was crazy at the time because he was basically saying our words are not going to work. We've tried that. It has not helped. Action's going to be the only thing. And so once he and his followers were attacked in Lawrence, Kansas, he fought back, and people were like, whoa, violence. And he was like, yeah, y'all started it, and this is not going to end without violence anyway. And of course, we know that to be true because we literally fought a civil war for this to happen, which is the whole point of this chapter. We're getting to the Civil War. And so the parties began to split along regional lines instead of political ideology. In other words, people in the North began to become Republicans, and people in the South began to be Democrats. And before, it was basically, what do you believe on this issue, that issue, this issue, that issue? But now it's basically like, are you for slavery? If so, you're going to be a Democrat at this time. Are you against slavery? If so, you're probably going to be a Republican at this time. And so the Free Soilers, the Northern Whigs, and the Northern Democrats who were against slavery, they all bound together and formed what is now known as the Republican Party. Although I will say 100 years later in the 1960s, these two parties flopped. And so you see a lot of people in the South that were Democrats during the time we're talking about are now Republicans. The Republicans are mostly in the South now in America in 2020. And the opposite is true. California, New York, Northern, that's the Democratic territory is basically in America now. And so the Republicans' main message and the reason they were created was basically to rid America of slavery. But they were not trying to get rid of slavery where it already existed. They just wanted the new territories out west, Kansas, Nebraska, all these other new territories that we either took from Mexico in that war or we bought in the Louisiana Purchase that are becoming states between basically the Mississippi River and, well, the Pacific Ocean, but the Colorado Rockies to be more specific. They are wanting to become states. And so the argument that has divided us for the first two sections is, are they going to be free states or are they going to be slave states? And so what the Republicans were saying is basically like, we're not going to mess with slavery where it already exists, but we're going to stop slavery from spreading. Democrats are not having that. They are basically saying if you start getting rid of slavery anywhere, pretty soon you'll get rid of slavery everywhere. And they were correct on that, but also good. We should be trying to get rid of slavery. And so for a brand new party, for this to be able to gain control of the House of Representatives is incredible. If you created a new party day in 2020, you would get not a lot of votes. In fact, you'd probably get laughed out of the election office when you tried to sign up. And so Northern Democrats, 3/4 of them were voted out in 1854 because, again, the whole idea became, are you for slavery? You're a Democrat. Are you against slavery? You're a Republican. And basically the whole country became single-issue voters in the 1840s somewhat, but specifically in 1854 and 58, 56 when we picked a president, which we'll get to later on. And then in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln, spoiler, becomes our president. He becomes president in 1861, but he's elected in 1860. You get it. So, like I said, 1856, we got to pick a president. 1854, on the slide before, that was just a congressional election. That happens in presidential off years, as you learned last year in the Constitution test. And so Republicans nominate John Fremont Democrats choose James Buchanan, and the presidential vote basically broke down to Fremont won the northern states, Buchanan won the southern states. The border states who had some slavery mostly voted Buchanan, so he won a very close election. But it was basically not state by state. It was basically just North voted Republican, South voted Democrat. Okay, and so one of the most important issues that was decided, one of the most famous court cases in American history is called the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott, okay, so this is, I'll try to break this down as shortly as I can because we're already 11 minutes in. Dred Scott was a slave in Missouri owned by a doctor. The doctor moved to Illinois. He moved near the Metro East area. In southern Illinois specifically, I don't remember exactly what town, but, a few hours drive now from where we are. And basically, the doctor returned to Missouri with Dred Scott, and then the doctor died. Once the doctor died, Dred Scott was like, hey, I was free. I lived for several years in Illinois. When you're in Illinois, you're free. And I'm not just going to go back to being enslaved just because this old, fart died. So this case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, this did not go well for Dred Scott, as you would not expect most court cases to go well for people of color in the 1850s in America. And so right off the bat, the Supreme Court said, you are absolutely still a slave. Even though that doctor is dead, you are passed down literally like a grandfather clock or bank account or, piece of clothing. And so they said that if you are a person of color and once you're a slave in America, you are literally nothing but a piece of property, no more than this cup is to me. Which is embarrassing that we put that on our actual records. And that was a Supreme Court case in the United States that basically said if you're a person of color, you don't have any rights as a citizen. And so they said, A, you're totally still a slave. B, you're nothing more than a piece of property. You are not a citizen of the United States. You have no rights to even, we should not have even done this because you have no right to bring a lawsuit because you are not a citizen. And furthermore, as the fact that we have just decided as a Supreme Court that all slaves are property, Congress, because the Constitution says you cannot take without reasonable search and seizure, that's the Fourth Amendment. You cannot take people's property without reason, that the United States has no right to prohibit slavery anywhere. That slavery should now not only be legal in the South where it already was, but should be legal in Illinois, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and all the northern states. And so this did not settle anything. It wasn't like they were like, okay, that's problem solved. And, now we're not going to. Northerners were just angrier because they knew by this time, and we should have known a lot earlier, quite frankly, that slavery was not only a wrong, but it was a moral evil that is literally killing thousands of people every year and is ripping apart families and is really oppressing an entire race of people. And so, again, just like the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which we talked about in the last section, it really just made people angrier and made them more determined to get rid of this. And so it was like on old Looney Tune cartoons when Elmer Fudd's gun won't fire and he looks down the barrel and it blows up in his face. That's what basically all these laws did for the Southern Democrats. And so famously, we had the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Stephen A. Douglas, who was the guy who was an Illinoisan who figured out how to get the Compromise of 1850 through. He didn't really like slavery, but he was willing to let it happen in order to keep the Union together. He was the one that had the idea of popular sovereignty. We let each state decide on their own, which is what we had in Section 2 when Kansas broke out in its own mini civil war and they were shooting at each other. We had 6,000 people vote in a state with only 1,500 eligible voters, which is not how elections are supposed to work. So he and Lincoln had a series of debates. And what a lot of people don't realize, a lot of people think that Stephen A. Douglas was running for president. He wasn't. He was running for senator from Illinois. So was Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln was somebody who nobody really knew who he was at that time. Stephen A. Douglas was somebody who people assumed would later on be president of the United States. He was a very famous politician in America. And so they had a series of, I believe off the top of my head, I'll look this up later, 7 debates throughout the state of Illinois. The closest to us was in Jonesboro, which is south of us. Anna Jonesboro is their school district you probably heard of. And so Lincoln became very famous because of this. He became famous as somebody who clearly spoke what he believed in a way that people could understand, and he became famous, and so he became a star within the Republican Party, and it really made him for 2 years later when he's running for president. But this is not that election, and in fact, the senatorial election from Illinois, even though Lincoln won the debates, became famous because of that. Douglas won the actual election, and so in hindsight, Lincoln was at that time, he was kind of disappointed. But in hindsight, this freed him up to run for president in 1860, which he did. And of course, he won and became one of our most famous and well-loved presidents, and the one that ended slavery. Okay. So John Brown, again, I mean, you can look up information on this on your own, but basically he was trying to take weapons to arm slaves to overthrow their masters and start a revolution that way. He did it failed. He and his followers, which are mostly his sons and their families, they were captured at Harpers Ferry. A lot of the reason was because slaves were beaten down by centuries of, literal slavery, but also being told that they were going to be set free and being disappointed that they were like, hey, we know how this goes when we try to fight. And so they were not really willing to take up the cause. And so he became a martyr to anti-slavery Republicans in the North, or Northerners who were against slavery. And he became someone who was seen as someone who gave his life for a great cause. So I believe that's the last slide. Yeah. And so we'll end that there. Anything that you want to know more about, feel free to message me, or, you're on a computer, of course, watching this, or a phone. So Google is your friend. You can watch, there are all kinds of good information on all this stuff. Sometimes on our remote days, I'll try to send stuff home that I think is interesting, just for your own supplementary learning or to help. So have a good day. If you're going outside, or if you're going to be around people like I'm about to be, get those masks on, wash your hands, stay safe. Don't forget to answer in Google Classroom comments the attendance question, which I asked earlier, and I will hopefully see you sometime soon, and you'll at least be seeing me, my giant floating head, soon later on this week or early next week. So have a good rest of the day. Bye.